I know what you're thinking, how can you have football boots specifically for women? Well, multiple brands have done it now, including the likes of Nike and Puma, and today I'm going to be testing them out. So there's a few things I want to find out. Is there actually a difference between men's and women's football boots? If so, what are those differences?
And see what effect it has on the pitch.
So there's 3 steps to this video. Number 1, put these new Puma boots head to head with the women's pair. Number 2, test Nike's latest women's football boots. And number 3, pair the women's boots and women's football and see how they compare to the men's versions. Let's get into it.
Right, so let's unbox these boots. And first things first, the box size is definitely very different. I'm guessing these are the men's and I'm guessing these are the women's, even though they are the same size boot. At least that's what I ordered, so let's find out. We'll unbox the men's first.
So yeah, a pretty standard football boot. Now let's look at the women's version.
And then the women's boots.
Now straight off the bat, it's hard to spot a difference.
Right, so these are 2 seemingly identical football boots, except one is made for men and one for women. Now it turns out there's actually quite a few differences, so I'm going to put both these to the test and see which one is the best. And whilst I'm testing them out, I want to challenge you guys to see if you can spot exactly what those differences are.
First up, I wanted to try on both pairs blindfolded and see if I could guess which pair was which.
Oh, the right foot feels tighter. Okay, so the right foot definitely feels tighter. Yeah, I reckon the right foot is the women's boot. Am I right? Yeah. Oh, there you go. Okay, so there is a difference in how they feel. That's going to be interesting when we go on to test them.
Now, I also weighed these boots and the men's came in at 257 grams and the women's at 241 grams, so there's actually quite a big difference. It's also worth mentioning that both boots cost the exact same price.
Right, so now I want to do some tests with both the men's and the women's boots. I've got 5 different tests and each one only one pair can win. Let's see who comes out on top.
Up first was the comfort test. So for comfort, both boots were good, but the women's pair did feel a little bit too tight around the midfoot, which especially on my left foot was slightly uncomfortable.
So comfort round goes to the men's.
So with 1 point to the men's boots, we move on to the sprint test. The women's boots on the left and the men's on the right. As you can see, it's literally a photo finish. There was no difference between them, so 1 point to both boots. Next up, we have the dribble test. Now we start off with the men's boots and they felt really nice going through this course. And we finished with a time of 10.2 seconds, not bad. Next up was the women's boots and not too much difference, honestly. Once again, they felt pretty nice. But I did finish 0.2 seconds slower. So for the dribble test, men's boots take the point. Now you may have noticed that the stud patterns are different on these boots, but why would women need different studs? Well, I'm going to explain that a little later in the video, but the next round is going to put that to the test with a turn and sprint challenge. Men's boots up first. So the men's boots got a score of 5.5 seconds. Let's see how the women's boots get on. Interesting results there. The women's boots taking the win by 0.2 seconds, making the scores 3-2 to the men's boots. The next test is all about the amount of protection each boot offers. When you search for the differences between men's and women's boots online, more padding is one of the stated benefits of women's boots. So let's see if that's actually true.
Right, first up is the men's boots. Alright, I can feel that. That is very thin, and that hurts quite a bit.
Next up, the women's boots. And honestly, they felt the exact same. No difference in the amount of padding at all. So for this test, no one gets a point. Next up was the control test, and the women's boots performed okay, except it's hard to explain, but something about them felt strange.
It's really weird with these women's boots. Every time I do a keep up, the ball seems to kind of flick back at me. It almost feels like they're pointing back. It's hard to explain, very strange.
Men's boots felt really good for control, so 1 point to them. And finally, we have the shooting test, and I'm going to be honest, I couldn't really tell the difference. Both boots felt really good, so I'm going to have to give a point to both of them. So the final scores, the men's boots won 5-3, but that's not the end of this debate. I still need to test out Nike's women's boots, and also maybe if I pair the women's boots and ball together, then combined they might be better in the test than the men's boots and ball. But first...
Right, so by now you're probably wondering what makes a pair of men's boots and women's boots different, because from the outside they look pretty much the same, but I can tell you from testing them out, they feel very different. So the biggest difference between the men's and women's football boots is the way they fit. Although they might look the same, I can assure you on feet they feel very, very different. The women's boots have a much narrower fit, which is very noticeable, and for me it's quite tight, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And as we found out from the weight test earlier, the women's boots are a fair bit lighter and generally will have a more cushioned and soft upper. The heel on the women's boots is far narrower and actually makes your foot feel a lot more locked down. And the final difference is the stud pattern on the bottom. They are considerably different, and I was thinking, why would Puma do this? But then I did some research and realised there was actually a bit of an epidemic in the women's game.
So ACL injuries seem to be much higher in women's football. Female footballers are incredibly 6 times more likely to suffer an ACL injury than the men. But the problem is, no one really knows exactly why this is happening. But it is known that women's feet are different in volume and shape than the men's, so there's a risk of injury if they're wearing a boot that doesn't fit properly. So this could be one of the reasons that boot manufacturers have recently been making boots especially for women.
Right, now we've got the Nike Lunas. I expected a bit more than that, I'm not gonna lie. I expected some paper or something. Yeah, that wasn't a very exciting unboxing, was it really?
So I put on Nike's new women's boots, and straight off the bat they felt like they had a lot more padding than any boot I've ever worn. And this was evident from the stamp test. They felt very secure. And for skills they were really nice too. They also have a stud pattern specific to this boot, so the traction felt very good. Because of the amount of padding on these boots, it was really nice to shoot into.
So the Nike Lunas are a really nice pair of football boots, and I really enjoyed testing these out. And honestly, if I didn't already know, there's no way I would have been able to tell these were a women's football boot. So that's why this final test is going to be a perfect decider to see which boot is better.
What happens when you use a men's boots and ball and put them up against women's boots and ball? How much difference will it make? I'll be doing multiple tests and see which comes out on top. First up, the dribble test.
Go.
So both felt very similar, but the men's products won by 0.2 seconds. Next up, the control test. The women's boots and ball supposedly have extra padding, so this should help with control. Honestly, it was hard to tell a difference between the two. If anything, the men's stuff was easier just because the ball was a bit heavier and seemed to bounce around less. And finally, the shooting test. First up, the women's boots and ball.
The boots feel good though, really tight and nice.
Now, I've got to say, the shots were flying in.
Oh,
despite hitting a few bangers, a lot of my shots went really wide or over the bar. Overall, I only scored 6 goals.
Woo!
Now, straight away with the men's stuff, it was a lot easier to score with, and I managed to get 9 goals.
Oh.
Now, the difference is that the goals with the men's stuff weren't as good as the women's ones, but I did score more overall. I think the extra weight of the ball made it easier to hit more accurate shots. So overall, is there a big difference between men's and women's football boots? Not really, but if you're a guy, I'd recommend sticking with men's football boots. And if you're a woman or have particularly narrow feet, the women's boots are more likely going to be best for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.